Well, good morning, County Council. Welcome to June, and welcome to all the YouTubers that are joining us this morning. I would ask Mr. Tifo to take the roll call, please.
Thank you, Warden. Councillor Kingston for Councillor Arnold. Welcome. Welcome again, I should say. Councillor Bird. Thank you. Councillor Boucher. Councillor Bradley. Councillor Bradley. Councillor Broad.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Present.
Thank you. Deputy Warden Hand.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Loosely.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Miller.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Napper.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Rombos.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Stark.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Veen.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Weber. Councillor Weber. Councillor White. Councillor White. And of course, Warden Marriott. We have a quorum.
Thank you. We acknowledge that this land on which we are gathered today is part of the ancestral land of the Chippewa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples, referred to collectively as the Anishinaabe. It is through the connection of the Anishinaabe with the spirit of the land, water, and air that we recognize their unique cultures, traditions, and values. Together as treaty people, we have a shared responsibility to act with respect for the environment that sustains all life, protecting the future for those generations to come. I would ask any member of council to declare pecuniary interest now or when the interest arises. Seeing none, I would look for a motion to go in camera for the reasons on the agenda. Deputy Warden Hand, second by Councillor Bean, all in favor. That's carried. To remind the public, anybody who have to leave the council chambers until we deal with the in-camera. Sure. Welcome back. Item number 6 is silent reflection. Thank you. Item number 7, I'd ask Mr. Tifo to rise and report from the motions of in camera, please.
Yes, thank you, Warden Marriott. I can report one matter, and that is that County Council met in camera this morning for a period of less than 2 minutes to approve its minutes of its in-camera session of its meeting on May 4th, 2022, and those minutes pertain to personnel matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 8 is the Board of Health update. And I see Dr. Renaday is logging on as we speak. Good morning, Dr. Renaday.
Good morning.
Welcome to June, and we're looking forward to your update.
Thank you, Warden. I'll just confirm you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay, great. So I actually struggled with, finding new information for this COVID update, and I think everyone on Council and the Board of Health should take that as probably a good sign. I think that, in terms of numbers, we do that all the time, but the last update on Monday showed that we had 14 new cases since the previous update, but that level of cases is fairly normal at this point. I think we're going to see decreases through the summer, but then potentially increases again in the fall as people start to congregate in indoor settings more. But having said that, I think the new reality is that COVID is sort of constantly present at some level, and we know that. So, consistent with what some other health units are doing as well, in an effort to sort of move to a more normal kind of monitoring approach and surveillance approach to this. So we're going to be announcing some further changes to the frequency of our reporting that would be more in line with what some other health units are doing. So moving to a once a week model for reporting on cases, just to focus more on the trends as opposed to the daily or weekly counts. And you'll see more health units go that way as well. And then finally, our immunization program continues. We have, in any given clinic day, we're still doing about 200 immunizations or so. And again, planning for the fall when we might require a surge or a potential surge in immunization if we're starting to see any signs of waning immunity. So those are the things that are sort of on the radar for the next few months, but really nothing major or different since the last time I updated you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Warden Marriott. Good morning, Dr. Renaday. I've had a few calls just in the last few days from various employees around the county saying that the mandated white masks that they've had to wear for the last 2.25 years, they've now been told to stop them immediately because they pose a health hazard and to change over to the blue masks. So my question is, what is the specific health hazard and why was this not known before?
Thanks, Councillor, for the question. I don't know that I have specific information on white masks or blue masks. What I can tell you is that in healthcare settings, there's a requirement to use a surgical mask, but in other settings, there's no particular requirement on what kind of mask needs to be used, except for that it should cover your nose and mouth and chin, I believe. And so most materials are fine for those normal purposes. And now in most settings, I believe that requirement has been lifted. And so people are at liberty to choose to wear them, but it's not a requirement outside of healthcare settings. So in a healthcare setting, someone might say, oh, you're wearing a mask that is not a surgical mask, and then they ask you to wear a surgical mask. But outside of those settings, I'm not aware of any requirement around what kind of mask should be used. And certainly there are surgical masks that are white and surgical masks that are blue. So I'm not sure that it's just, I don't think it's about the color of the mask.
So thank you. And so just to finish up with then, you're not aware of any health hazards that these particular white masks are causing?
No, not specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bradley.
Yes, Dr. Ronde. I'm sorry, I came on a little bit late. When do you intend to switch to the weekly reporting? And do you have a day of the week that you will do that?
Yes, Councillor. So we intend to move to that model today, and it would be every week on Wednesdays. So you would get a middle of the week kind of snapshot.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Rumbouts.
Yes. Thank you, Warden. I'm just wondering, now is probably the best time for us to be doing an evaluation of our response to this pandemic. Is that happening, and are we going to get the results from that, where we really examine the cost benefits versus the detriments of the lockdowns, of the masks, all of those things, and even of the vaccine? Are we examining the effectiveness of it and all of that, and compared to the cost of life and injury and all of that? And when will we get a report on that? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Good question. Challenging to answer because there are multiple levels of that conversation. So let me talk you through the different levels, and only some of them involve us, right? Most likely, we would expect that there would be multiple levels of debriefing from this pandemic. So there'd be national ones, provincial ones, and so forth. The evidence on sort of the cost benefit of the different interventions is more likely to come out in provincial or national reviews, right? Because you actually need researchers to participate in that kind of exercise of what the costs and benefits were. Locally, you can do potentially a smaller version of it, but it's hard to guarantee that the methods are reliable. What's more likely to happen locally that you would see is a couple of things. So Lambton Public Health is planning our own kind of debrief about what went well and what could be changed for future pandemic responses. But all of the levels that had emergency operations centers would be doing some kind of debrief now that they have closed those down or moved to a more normal kind of model. So I would expect that the county would do some kind of emergency debrief, and that other municipalities that activated emergency plans would also do a debrief. So there'll be probably reports coming out from all of those debriefs. Plus, we're examining how can we do a broader sort of multi-sector debrief with different groups. And we're trying to figure out if there are any pre-established ways of doing that we can follow so that we can do it more reliably than just sort of off the cuff.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you again, Dr. Renaday, for your update, and we'll see you next time.
Yes, thank you.
Item number 9 is delegations. We have one delegation today, so I'd look for a motion to invite the delegation to present to Council. Councillor Bean, seconded by Councillor Cook. All in favor? That's carried. Nancy Dubois, consultant with DUB Fit Consulting, Staff Sergeants Ross Stuart and Erica VanRoboys, O.P.P, and John Sottosanti, Media Relations for Sarnia Police, will be presenting to County Council regarding Lambton County's Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan on behalf of the Lambton Community and Safety and Wellbeing Plan Oversight Committee. I see the Mrs. Dubois is present, and she has her slides ready to go. Go ahead, please, Nancy.
Thank you, Warden. Good morning, everyone. My pleasure to be here with our representatives from your Oversight Committee that have been working hard at this plan for the last couple of years now. I will take you through a bit of the agenda aspects as before we get going too much further. Looking at the purpose of today is really to familiarize yourself with the staff recommendations report related to the plan, provide some highlights in the short time it's here. I know that you all received it ahead of time, so we're happy to entertain some questions at the end as well. So our agenda will address those purposes as outlined here. Just a little bit of background and context to the plan itself. This was a requirement from the Ministry of the Attorney General back in 2021, and every municipality needed to consider how they were going to accomplish the creation of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. It was mandated under the Police Services Act. In Lambton County, some of you will remember back to February 5th of 2021, when it was decided here that rather than each municipality creating their own, the county would look at coordinating one plan for the county. Every municipality signed on to that process through your council vote. So the First Nations communities across the province were not required to participate, but in all cases they were invited. And we have had great representation from the Indigenous peoples as we've planned this particular initiative. With the police services behind the provincial directive on this, we know that the goal of crime prevention is not something that police can accomplish alone. It's a shared responsibility that takes an entire community to support the safety and well-being of our residents. And through this project, our oversight committee has developed a starting point in Lambton that can be measured and reported on. And I'll tell you more about that as we get to the end of the presentation. So the Oversight Committee is a group of representatives that were the decision-making body related to the initiative. However, we did have a framework to follow that the province had provided. They did a pilot project first to develop these kinds of supporting materials. And here you'll see in the concentric circles there, this framework that identifies from the outside in narrowing from prevention efforts to more risk mitigation and incident responses. What you're going to see in the priorities that we've established for Lambton County is a greater energy focused on the outside two rings, the social development and prevention aspects, as the ones that seem to have the greatest impact over time with respect to population health. We have had a bit of a span of time to work on the project. Of course, as Dr. Rounday talked about, we've had this thing called COVID in the middle of all of it. So there's been some hiccups along the way, but we began in February of 2020 and moving into the time frame that we are now in submitting this to you folks first and then to the ministry. Along the way, several different opportunities for community input. And we had over 1,100 residents respond to two different surveys that we did. One was a general population survey with anyone welcome to participate. The other one we did a little bit later, as you'll see in the June to December timeframe here with the red dot at the top. We wanted to hear more specifically from the people who are most affected by the priority issues that we'd established. So those with living or lived experience in the areas. In terms of what we heard from some of the surveys, it was really quite impressive from the standpoint of people feeling fairly, this focus particularly on the safety aspect with a little bit more in the well-being area, but generally quite positive in terms of how people were feeling in the community. There were, as you see at the bottom right-hand corner, satisfaction with personal safety rate at a 78%. So what we took from this, with the graph that you see above there, improving safety and well-being, we certainly did get some suggestions of where there could be some improvements, and these led directly into the identification of our priority areas. The result of all of the data that we gathered, research, looking at indicators in the community. There's a whole data report that accompanies the plan if you're interested in the details for that. Our advisory committee, which was a large group of about 25 different organizations, that is an element that was mandated by the ministry. You had to have one of these groups in place, and certainly it was a godsend in terms of the information that people brought to the table as far as the needs and the opportunities in the community. So these are the 5 priorities that ended up being the decision of both the advisory committee and then the oversight committee. They are intentionally not presented in any kind of hierarchy. They're so interconnected. It reinforces the need for a coordinating mechanism as this plan moves forward, because there are such strong connections between the 5. There also is no particular emphasis on an age or a stage of life. We felt quite strongly that these affect the entire population to greater or lesser degrees, and didn't want to get into specific populations. This is a community-wide effort. What I'm going to share with you in the next 5 slides, we're going to unpack each one of these in quick detail, starting with the community safety one. We're just going to present them in alphabetical order and focusing particularly on the desired outcomes. What you'll also see on the slides are some of the strategies that have been identified, a lot of which build on existing initiatives in the community. Some represent some growth in existing things, and there are a few brand new elements, but for the most part, they really do reinforce the existing initiatives. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Staff Sergeants Ross and VanRoboys to take us through the community safety desired outcomes.
Okay, thanks, Nancy, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to have a few minutes to bring you up to speed as to the content of the plan that we've worked hard to put together for you. From a community safety standpoint, there's 4 desired outcomes that we've identified that our intentions are to focus upon. As you can see on the slide, the first one deals specifically with the reduction and prevention of harm and victimization. Specifically, we want to focus on three areas, that being violent crime, illicit drugs, as well as property crimes. And some of the strategies that we will employ to meet those outcomes will include fraud prevention, residential and business related assessments to assist with lessening property crimes or preventing it, as well as programs such as Lock It or Lose It, which are local programs that encourage folks to lock their doors, lock their vehicles, and essentially avoid the easy targets for people who would be focusing upon property-related crime. We also want to improve upon our mental health engagement team, which is known as MHEART, which I'm sure that many of you are well aware of. This is a program that is already in place with both Sarnia Police Service as well as the O.P.P, where we have mental health clinicians riding with our uniform officers and physically attending calls for service with our officers. The real benefits that come out of this program include minimizing the number of mental health related apprehensions that are being done, as well as putting community resources in place immediately for folks. And it's been a real benefit, not only to our officers to have these clinicians in the vehicles, but also, most importantly, to the community members who are actually getting meaningful help. So one of our outcomes here is to maximize the effectiveness of that team, and with the intention of hopefully expanding it. And part of that, of course, relates to the transition process that occurs between the police as well as hospital staff. I can tell you that Sarnia Police Service, the O.P.P, and Blue Water Health, along with CMHA, have worked very hard to put in place a transition protocol that minimizes the amount of time that officers are spending in the hospital when someone is apprehended for a mental health related reason. But the real benefit here is that the folks that need that assistance are spending less time in the ER and are getting direct contact with the mental health clinicians at the hospital who can provide them with the meaningful help that they need. So we want to continue to improve that transition process. And finally, as always, Sarnia Police Service and the O.P.P want to enhance the delivery of service in our interaction with the public. And a big portion of that is going to be sharing information with the community regarding statistics on things like violent crime, illicit drugs, property crimes, as well as our efforts to minimize those things in the community and to address those issues. So those are the points that I wanted to speak of today with regards to community safety.
Thanks, Ross. Into the housing and homelessness area, we have a plan for the county already in place. We're partway through that. So the desired outcomes, 3 of them will reinforce the existing strategies within the plan, and you can see those here on the screen. The next one will take us to the mental health and addictions, which also builds on 2 very strong approaches already underway in the community. We decided to combine these into one strategy, again, because of so much of the overlap between with individuals that are affected by either one of these issues. I won't read you the specific outcomes here, but these also do reinforce some of the important existing kinds of things that are underway. That takes us to the poverty area, where there are two related desired outcomes here. One is to actually reduce the number of individuals and families who are living in poverty, and then very closely related to that, looking at strategies to increase food security for everyone within the county. The last of the five is the area of systemic racism, and probably the newest one on the sort of the radar of the community, looking at three particular areas of outcome: increasing awareness of and addressing racial discrimination issues, increasing awareness of the historical roots of racism and discrimination, and increase the public awareness of barriers and challenges faced by racialized communities, religious minorities, and Indigenous peoples. So to leave you with the next steps of the Oversight Committee, we wanted to make sure there was sort of a jumping off point for where things will go from here. You can see here listed the 6 or 7 next step suggestions, and not necessarily in chronological order, but a bit of a sequence. That the first piece would relate to recruiting a leadership team for the implementation phase, which may include representatives from the committees to this point, but there may also include some other individuals as well. So you'll see that from B in the recommendation list, some of the organizations and members may continue, but we will need to think about perhaps a different mix of people for the implementation, and certainly a strong link to each of those 5 priority areas. There are some unknowns as far as provincial requirements at this stage, or accountabilities with respect to the reporting and sort of next phase of these plans. It's very vague at this stage what they're expecting, so I'm sure there will be some more information coming, and I would suggest that probably the election this week will have some impact on where this all goes in the next little while. So from the staff recommendations report that you received for today, the county has a good history of working closely with its lower tier municipalities, as well as First Nations communities and the over 25 stakeholder groups that we engaged with over the course of the project. We are well positioned to support this ongoing community safety and well-being work, and with the legislative framework behind it, we're working in partnership with this multi-sectoral advisory committee. While the county is not responsible for the delivery of police services, the principles and values of the county's strategic plan speak to a shared community of interest that needs to exist in Lambton in order to effectively respond to the long-term safety and well-being of our community. As well, the county's mission statement supports strong collaborative efforts with its municipal and community partners, and the county as an organization does not stand alone or work in singular fashion. It recognizes the need to work collaboratively with both the 11 municipal partners that collectively constitute the county and many organizations and volunteers who contribute to the building, well-being, and future of Lambton County. There are 2 requirements in the Police Services Act that drives this initiative, and I'll leave you with these as far as the sort of next steps for council. And it's really they both relate to the support that's anticipated to move the plan forward. As I said, most of the initiatives or the strategies are building on existing things and not building much brand new resource work into it. So at this stage, I'd like to entertain any questions that you might have. I think that's the order of events, and then turn it back to the warden. Warden, do you monitor the questions?
Yes, we can take questions. Thank you for that presentation, Nancy. Any questions? Councillor Bradley and then Councillor Stark.
Yeah, thank you very much for the report. As you know, with all reports, what are the measurables 6 months or a year from now? And I'm particularly focused on the systematic racism and the homeless issue. And while there may be long-term plans, I'm seeing a lot of grief and misery. The misery index in the community and other communities is very high as it relates to the homeless issue. And that is a real concern. So how does this council put in place for the next council 6 months or a year from now that there's an automatic review so we can measure has there been progress or not?
I'm not sure who's in the council chambers. Is Valerie Colasanti in
Yes, she is.
the house? Valerie, could you speak to that?
Certainly. Thanks, Nancy. Through you, Warden Marriott, to Councillor Bradley. In the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, we didn't want to do any duplications, so we've adopted within this plan the 10-year housing and homeless plan that the County of Lambton presented in 2021. We do an annual report to Council at committee, and that report actually will be coming in June. And then we have to also do an annual report to the provincial government. So within that report, we will be reporting on each of the 4 objectives as well as all of the outcomes. And then that can be carried over into the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. So that should be how we can report back to both council and the community.
Okay, so what I'm trying to understand is, so this plan is going to be received, filed, and these other actions will take place, but this plan will not be driving that process. Is my understanding correct on this?
Yes, because the housing and homelessness plan is a 10-year strategy for the county, we've carved off a few pieces of it to include in the community safety and wellbeing plan to address that as one of the established priorities. But it will happen in tandem because it's really the same plan as far as housing and homelessness goes.
Okay, final question then on systematic racism. How do you measure that? And I know the local immigration partnership is very involved in this. How do you measure that? That's a very elusive.
There's really there's a couple of responses I would provide to that one. This is a relatively new focus area for municipalities and local government to get involved with, and certainly some have been undertaking strategies in this area for quite some time, longer than what Lambton County has been doing. And what typically is the process is developing indicators. So what would indicate change? What are the things that you'd watch for to see some sort of progress being made? And those are excuse me, those are what then get measured. So we have identified in the safety and wellbeing plan some of the strategies to be what the indicators are. So with systemic racism in particular, I'm just going to reference the page that it's on in the plan. It's on page 22 of the plan. We didn't put all the whole plan into the slides, but on page 22 it does indicate what the indicators are that we've set. So it will be a matter of trying to measure those. There has been a fair bit of work done in several other communities that we can borrow from as well. So that as long as we are looking to establish the same sort of progress indicators, there's some beg, borrow, and steal that can go on with what others are doing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Stark.
Thank you, Warden. My question first, and is a fairly short one, followed by maybe a little bit longer one. The first is, in your summary, you talked about monitoring, that this council would be monitoring the process. My question is, one, how is that done? And two, what are the implications if the monitoring identifies shortcomings, and is there any accountability of this council to ensure that the outcomes are in fact going in the right direction? And I'll follow up with the second question.
Certainly. This area of accountability is very vague as far as the province is concerned and what the legislative directive is. They indicate, and it seems to change a little bit depending on who you speak to, but it's generally about a 3 to 4 year window that the next sort of check-in point would come to be. As far as what the local requirements are, I think we've been very modest in identifying what these indicators are. We wanted to make sure that they're things that we're already capturing so that it's not a lot of extra work or extra effort that's needed to gather the information. It's for the most part, in fact, I would say almost 100%, the things are already being monitored. So there's not any increased accountability than what you have now. What hasn't been in place before, because this is the first version of this plan, plan is anything formalized around these 5 priorities. And so there would be some coordinating or some collective work that would be required to pull the information related to all 5 of the priority areas together into some sort of report. We don't know, we don't have a template for that as far as what the ministry is expecting, and we may not get one. It may end up being whatever each community decides to put forward. These plans from one municipality or area to the other are really quite different. There was no expectation of what these had to look like. There were a few requirements, but it's pretty loose and flexible in terms of what the expectations were.
I'm not sure that deals with the overall question of accountability. It seems to me that if you're going to monitor something, there should be some implications to what the outcomes are and what we as a council are doing to make sure that the outcomes are in fact happening. But notwithstanding that, my second question is also on systematic racism, and I'll defer to Valerie Colasanti if I've got these numbers wrong, because I'm going by memory. But I believe the 2021 survey dealt with 256 respondents or thereabouts. So it was a significant sample size. My question is, and I look at I'm referring now to the report later in the agenda, which talks about the actual report itself. And on page 26, it talks about desired outcomes as it relates to systematic racism. And one of the 3 components are increased awareness of and address racial discrimination issues, increase awareness of historical roots of racism and discrimination, and increase public awareness of the barriers and challenges faced by racialized communities, religious minorities, and Indigenous peoples. The reason that I identify those outcomes is, or hopeful outcomes, desired outcomes, is that we have demonstrated at the local elected level, elected officials who deny the fact that racism exists in our community. So my question is, are you not only going to look at the reality of the public awareness, but also, most importantly, the elected officials who are denying that this racial problem exists? So will you be addressing the elected officials?
There is, if you look to the strategies that are attached to those desired outcomes, number 5 refers to a Canadian Coalition of Municipalities Against Racism and Discrimination, and they have a framework for addressing this. The local immigration partnership that's in place now is the lead organization sort of on this priority. Certainly not acting alone, but they have their own council and coalition. That framework spells out specifically how municipalities and their elected officials, they're not the only sort of target audience for that work, but they are definitely included in that very specific strategy number 5. I'm not sure if Valerie wanted to add anything more to this from the immigration partnership aspect.
Thank you, Nancy. No, I don't think from the immigration we have anything to add to that. And I think when we start to talk about actual training of council in lower tier, I would want to defer to our clerk's office to maybe speak to that piece.
Please, Mr. Tifo.
Yes, thank you. If I understand correctly, the question specific to what will we do or what are we contemplating in terms of council elected officials on this subject matter. And of course, we're going into an election, and of course, in December, we're going into inaugural meetings. And at that point in time, we always offer a number of education sessions, training sessions, awareness sessions, and we're actively planning those sessions to include matters and subject matters pertaining to that issue. And we're currently working with a group in town out of the Sarnia area and First Nation, led by First Nations, on awareness, if I can put it that way, awareness sort of sessions So yeah, we're addressing it in that regard. Unfortunately, individuals are individuals. We can't necessarily go any deeper than that, but we can certainly sort of approach individuals and communicate what our values are, and hopefully they abide by the values of the organization.
Deputy Warden Hand.
Thank you. My question is a little bit different, but I think it's related. Number G, it talks about on the under oversight committee, talks about undertaking community-wide awareness. Last Thursday and Friday, I attended a police board conference virtually, and one of the sessions that really stuck with me was on trafficking. And I feel like this area is very vulnerable, being a border community and highway accessibility. But I'm wondering, it was a program that was done in Brantford for community awareness, and I was thinking it was something that would be useful here, but I don't know. I haven't got to the point of finding out how much we've done or who you would approach, but would that then go back to individual police boards? Sergeant Ross, Stuart, I haven't talked to you because we haven't had our board meeting since I attended that last week, but I was going to follow up with you in regard to this communication and community sessions. Is this something we've done or haven't done, and how would we move that forward? Is it outside of this or related to this, and then go back to like Sarnia Police Board, Lambton County Board, Pecuniary, things like that? I was just wondering about how we work on that. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Hand, I'm just, if you could just clarify what it is that you would like me to answer, what the question was.
If we were to do a community-wide educational awareness session on trafficking, as was done in the city of Brantford, it was excellent. It was, targeted at young people, and there was a video and things like that. And I was wondering, I thought that would be something that would be useful in Lambton County, but I don't know if it's something that we've already done. I'm not aware of it. And would it be done through individual boards, or is it part of this group? I was just wondering how you'd move something forward like that as a community initiative.
Okay, thank you. Certainly there is awareness training that we do through our school resource officer and our community services officer within the schools, specific to issues such as trafficking. That's absolutely included in the curriculum. From a community-wide standpoint, there's nothing that I'm aware that we have done. However, certainly that is something that we would support. Being a border community, there certainly is the potential for trafficking in all forms, whether that's weapons, illicit drugs, human trafficking, to be more of a concern because of the proximity to the border. And certainly we'd be fully supportive of assisting with any sort of community meeting that we did. I think it would be outside the scope of this particular group with the community safety and well-being plan. It would be more of an initiative that would be run through our police service boards and Lambton County O.P.P and Sarnia Police Service.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for that presentation, Nancy, Ross, and the rest of the panel, and we'll see the next steps. Thanks again.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for your time.
We'll be dealing with this again in 14B. So that moves us to item number 10, minutes of council of May the 4th. Mover, Councillor Miller, seconded by Councillor Bean. All in favor? That's carried. Item number 11, correspondence. We have one item under correspondence to receive and file. It's a letter from Tanya Daniels, City Clerk, City of Brantford. How would you like to deal with this? Mover, Councillor Stark moves. Councillor Cook seconds. All in favor? That's carried. Item number 12, information reports. One under Corporate Services Division. Recommended to receive and file. Councillor Rumbouts, Deputy Warden Hand, all in favor? That's carried. We have no items under not requiring a motion, and that brings us to reports requiring a motion, one under Infrastructure and Development Services Division on Roundabout. Moved by Councillor Stark.
I'll move to put it on the floor for discussion.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Bean. Go ahead, Councillor Stark.
Yes, with respect to the issue of the roundabout, the delay of the roundabout, I wonder if the lower tier municipality involved has been given the option of bridging the difference in terms of pricing. I know that in the city of Sarnia, there was a cooperative agreement as it related to Michigan Ave when we were doing a reconstruction. And I wondered if that same opportunity was afforded to the lower tier.
Mr. Cole, please.
Thank you, Warden. Thank you, Councillor, for that question. The specific example of Michigan Ave, when we partnered, that was done through cooperation that was identified long before the project itself. It was, the funds came out of development charges. So that money had specifically been set aside for the widening of Michigan. We have not reached out to the local municipality to ask them to participate in the roundabout, and in fact, because that intersection is a county road, it would probably be inappropriate for us to ask the local municipality to bring that forward. This is not a development related or an expansion related improvement. It's a safety related improvement, and I think that responsibility rests with us.
Councillor Rumbouts, please.
Yes, I just want to speak to this as this is a safety issue in our community, and one that's very close to my heart. One of our councillors' families, along with my daughter, were in an accident at that intersection. So this is happening. It happens 2 or 3 times a year, if not more. And it is a very serious issue in our community. The people who live kitty corner to that intersection said they can have a drinking game on a Friday night as to how many times there's a near miss at that intersection. And anybody who drives on that area, like I've very, very often have had people, they're very aggressive. They're trying to get out to the lake, especially this time of year. That's a very, very busy highway, and they're not expecting a stop sign to be there. Another concern that I have with delaying this project is the road itself that's on Egremont Road between that intersection, and I'm going to say probably a kilometer to a kilometer and a half on Egremont Road has not been completed, because I think in anticipation that that roundabout was going to be put up. But that section of the road is deteriorating at a very rapid pace, and we get traffic that gets detoured around at that corner, and it could be another safety issue if those repairs don't happen this year. Like the side of the roads, Ms. Joris, you drive, I'm sure, that area as well. Like it's kind of falling apart, that section of the highway. So there's obviously safety concerns. We have already announced this as a budgeted item for the county in our municipality, and with great response from the municipality. So it's going to be very disappointing to the people in our municipality to hear that it's going to be delayed. I also am concerned about the fact that, is it going to get cheaper next year? Is it going to, inflation continues to rise. Is next year, are we going to see another delay because, it's just not quite meeting the budgeted amount? So is there any way that we can find in our reserves or anything a possibility of getting this project done this year?
Mr. Cole, please.
Thank you, Warden. Thank you, Councillor. Of course, I mean, this project was brought forward for this consideration because, I mean, the increased cost was significant to the original price that was submitted to council. You should know that this is the impact of proceeding or not. The second reason is that we had two bidders on this project, and we are somewhat concerned that whether or not that is a competitive bid, whether we're getting the best price for our value. So you're absolutely right that intersection was left to end of life in order to proceed with these improvements, and in fact, the decision-making process to qualify this as a viable roundabout project considered the reconstruction of that intersection anyway, right? So we were going to spend a certain amount of that roundabout money anyway in order just to reconstruct the intersection, which made it an opportune time to proceed with these improvements. So as far as being able to proceed with this next year, council is at its ability to assign that extra funding to direct us to proceed. We are able to do that. There's nothing preventing us from doing that if we have the extra funding allocated, and that funding could, I mean, it could potentially come out of long-term financing, or it could potentially come out of other grant funding that was earmarked for future years. So if we were directed to do so, we would advance those funds.
Follow up, Councillor Rumboats.
Yes, I would move that council not consider deferring this and that we move forward with the project.
Do we have a seconder to the motion? Councillor Stark?
Yes, I'll second it and speak to it. I think this is a perfect example of construction inflation, where construction inflation is so unpredictable that, according to the recommendation, we would be setting aside a $750,000 allotment in the year 2023. I don't think $750,000 even comes close to covering what the inflationary factor of doing this job a year hence. So it's my feeling that we should be moving forward with this project. My first inclination was to give the lower tier the opportunity of moving that way, but seeing that Mr. Cole has indicated that it is appropriately a county responsibility, it is time to deal with this. And when you have safety at the issue, what makes this any different than the curve at Forest Line? Like, if that was so important, why is this not important? So in my view, that we should be moving forward with this.
Okay, Councillor Napper, I seen your hand as well. Were you just seconding that, or did you have a comment?
I was just seconding, but I would add to Councillor Stark there that it's been on the books for a long time, and there's been, I think it's justified, and I agree that next year is the inflation rate, we don't know where it's going, but it seems to me that it's a project that's worthy of doing this year.
Okay, Councillor Bradley.
A procedural question: does the motion include retendering before it goes forward?
Good question. Mr. Cole, would you comment on that, please?
Thank you, Warden, and through to you, Councillor. No, that I think if we are going to retender, we would need to postpone it till next year. So we either need to make a decision to proceed today, or
that's Councillor Kingston. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time to ask, but is the roundabout at Kimball Side Road and Petroleum Line still somewhere on the books? And where would it kind of fall in the process of safety improvements?
Okay, do you wish to comment on that, Mr. Cole, please?
Yes, thank you, Warden, and through to you, Councillor. So that project was presented again as part of the budget, and it was deferred to next year. for a decision-making process.
Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson and then Councillor Broad.
Thank you. From what I'm reading in there, though, if it went to reserves now, you would put a line item in for 2023 to finish paying out the item, and money could be put back in reserves then. Would that be correct?
Mr. Cole, please. Or whoever would like to, yeah, okay.
Thank you, Councillor. No, I don't think we would be doing that. I think it would be, the project would be likely substantially complete this year. So we would find an alternate funding source, and we could either do that through long-term financing or through advancing other grant money earmarked for future projects. So I don't think we could put off paying the contractor until next year for the work that's done this year.
Follow up, Councillor Ferguson.
No, what I meant was take the money from reserves now to pay, but as a line item, put the money back in the reserves next year, the equivalent amount that you would take out now. You're borrowing from your reserves.
Mr. Cole, please.
I mean, that's a viable option as well. I can just look across the room to our treasurer just to confirm his feelings on that.
Mr. Pelarkio, please.
Through the warden, I think the question revolves around the source of funding for increased expenditure of approximately $750,000 on this project. And I think what Mr. Cole is trying to explain is that we can definitely look at grant funding if that is available. If it's not available, we look at long-term financing such as debt. And the councillor alluded to the potential option of borrowing from a reserve fund this year and redeposit it in the following year. If you do that, you can do that, but you know there's a levy consequence for it. Is that you're right off the bat you're looking at approximately $750,000 that would impact the 2023 levy.
Okay, Councillor Broad, you had a question.
Thanks, Warden Marriott. No, it was the same question that Councillor Ferguson had. I can see if we're putting in the 2023 budget, let's borrow out of our reserve today and make sure that amount gets put back in the 2023 budget. That just makes common sense to me. If we're going to do it for next year anyways, let's do it now, pull the money out of a reserve and make sure that it gets put back in next year. Makes common sense to me.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Stark.
I just ask for a recorded vote, please.
Okay, so noted. Any Councillor Loosely?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Warden. I just would like to have this motion read again, just so we're all clear on what we're voting on. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, he's asking for to hear it again. Mr. Tifo, please, will you read the motion?
Yes, the current motion that you're debating has been moved by Councillor Rombout, seconded by Councillor Stark, and that motion is not to go ahead with the recommendation that's currently in the report, but rather to instruct staff to go ahead with the construction of the roundabout and any other funds needed this year to complete that project be pulled from reserves.
Any other comments? Councillor Bradley.
Yes, just a question. Is there going to be a cap on this budget? So if there's any overruns, which is common to all of us these days, it will come back to County Council?
Mr. Cole, please.
Through you, Warden. Thank you, Councillor. We typically wouldn't put a cap in it, but we would follow our purchasing policy. And we do have a history of reporting our capital programs through the year, and plan to continue to do that to make sure the council is fully aware of any overruns associated with that work.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, questions before I call the vote? Before I have Mr. Tifo call the vote. Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I hate prioritizing, where if we're going to defer on the St. Clair one for another year, we're waiting for that to happen, then I hate prioritizing one over the other. Even if we're taking money out of reserve to get something done this year, I would fully agree with staff recommendation. We don't know what the costs are going to be exactly, but at the same token, robbing Peter to pay Paul is almost like, why are we prioritizing one over the other? Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Rumboats.
Just to speak to that, this has been on the books for a long time, for several years, well before that other project was on the books or even mentioned. So it's a matter of what was already the priority. That other roundabout wasn't even brought to council's attention until this year, I believe. So I think it doesn't really relate. One project doesn't really relate to the other, in my opinion.
I believe it was a motion by Councillor Arnold that tabled that till next year. Okay, seeing no other questions or comments, I'll ask Mr. Tifo to call the question.
All right, so the motion moved by Councillor Rombout, seconded by Councillor Stark, that the recommendation in the report not be accepted, but rather that the project move forward this year and that any financial shortfalls be pulled, to complete the project, be pulled from reserves. And we will start with Councillor Broad.
Yes.
Councillor Broad, I have a yes. Councillor Cook. No. Councillor Cook, I have a no. Councillor Ferguson. Yes. Councillor Ferguson, I have a yes. Deputy Warden Hand. Deputy Warden Hand, I have a yes. Councillor Loosely? No. I have a no. Councillor Loosely? Councillor Miller? Yes. Councillor Miller, I have a yes. Councillor Napper?
Yes.
Councillor Napper, I have a yes. Councillor Rombout? Yes. Councillor Rombout, I have a yes. Councillor Stark?
Yes.
Councillor Stark, I have a yes. Councillor Veen? No. Councillor Veen, I have a no. Councillor Kingston for Arnold? Yes. I have a yes. Councillor Kingston? Councillor Bird? Yes. I have a yes. Councillor Bird? Councillor Bradley?
Yes.
Councillor Bradley, I have a yes. And Warden Marriott?
Yes.
Warden Marriott, I have a yes. The motion carries.
Thank you. Let's see here. Sorry, let's see. That moves us to Item B, Public Health Services Division, going back to the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. How would you like to deal with this? Councillor Bradley.
I would move that we accept this plan, but we ask that on an annual basis, it be brought back to County Council for review.
Okay, Councillor Stark, do you second that?
I do, and I'd like to also further highlight the monitoring aspect of this. I'd like to specifically know how County Council is going to monitor this and how, in fact, we will be reported back to, as Councillor Bradley has indicated. Thank you.
Okay, who would like to attempt? Mr. Taylor, would you like to attempt that, please?
Thank you, through you, Warden Marriott. So those two aspects absolutely will be incorporated. The monitoring, I think, is very important, as you described, and how will County Council be reported back to. So the plan behind this is to satisfy the ministry's requirement to submit the plan. So with that endorsement today, that would happen. And then behind that, the leadership team would start to develop the template for reporting back so that we can start to combine this work. And I don't see any concern with reporting back to County Council in that manner. And how we do that, we have been led by the consultant to a couple of implementation models that exist out there in the province. So we haven't landed on one specifically yet, but we do have some resources to look at that will guide us through that approach. So we will follow back up with the annual reporting behind this follow-up.
As a follow-up to that comment, it is the annual aspect of the monitoring that concerns me. If we're only going to hear about this once a year, that is not enough. We need to hear more often, whether it be quarterly. We need more of an update than an annual report, because quite frankly, if we only get an annual report, from my perspective, that's not monitoring at all. We need to hear more often, tangibly, what are you doing? What are the results? What are the impacts? How do you measure those impacts? That's what I'm looking for. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor, please.
Sure, and I think the annual reporting is what I'm hearing is a council requirement. I'm not understanding that that's the requirement for the province yet. We're not sure of what the frequency for reporting back on this is, but certainly to satisfy county council's interest, we can do that. The frequency that is asked, and again, this is about like the county is supporting this plan and the requirements of this plan. And I think what we need to come back to is that report also talks to dedicated resources that might be required depending on how much work this becomes. But at this point, we're happy to start that work as we've done, and we can bring these reports back to county council on that frequency. And I would suggest the first time we come back wouldn't just be a report, would probably be a presentation to county council.
Okay, you satisfied with that, Councillor Stark?
Thank you. I am satisfied to the extent that when I see the first report, I'll have more comment, if I'm still here.
Okay, Councillor Bradley.
First of all, I mean, what I'm suggesting, perhaps every fall, because I want to give staff time on this and the groups involved. Secondly, these are deep structural issues. And I don't view them as every month you get a report on what's happening. I think what you need to do is look at what are the bigger picture issues here. And there's quite substantial ones on homeless, racism, et cetera. And then every year we would get an update on what's progressed with all these other groups that are doing things. And then if we want to jump off and say we need to put a bigger priority on this issue, that's when I think the county would get more involved.
Thank you. Any further discussion before we call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Item number 15, committee minutes. I'd call on Councillor Stark, please.
I move the committee minutes of Committee AM on May the 18th for your consideration.
Thank you. Under Infrastructure and Development Services, there's a motion for correspondence. Under Information Reports, motion for the reports to be received and filed. Under Public Health Services Division, a motion for correspondence as well as number 4, Information Reports from the Public Health Services Division. And information report as well to the ambulance response times was number 5. Under Cultural Services Division, information report was motion number 6. And reports requiring a motion under the regarding the library's donations, that was motion number 7. And number 8 was report regarding museums, gallery, and archives collection management. And number 9 was adjournment. Councillor Stark, please.
I move that the minutes as presented be adopted.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Veen. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. PM committee minutes. I'd call on Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Warden Mayor. I'd like to present committee PM minutes. Consideration by the council.
Thank you. First motion was under Long-Term Care Division regarding COVID-19 update. Also, information report regarding funding announcements, and that was motion number 2. Number 3 was regarding the occupancy of the first quarter. Under Finance, Facilities, and Court Services was motion number 4 regarding court services, first quarter stats. And information report regarding electric vehicle charging stations was motion number 5. Under Social Services Division, a report regarding Service Manager Annual Information was number 6. Number 7 was regarding Housing Services Statistical Report, Quarter 1. And number 8, regarding Lambton Works Center Employment Services Transformation Update. And number 9 was adjournment. Councillor Ferguson, please.
Make a motion to accept these minutes and begin committee.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Miller. All in favor? That's carried. That brings us to 16. There are no items tabled from previous meetings. And number 17, notice of motion. We have none on our agenda.
There is none, no.
Yeah. And number 18, other business. Councillor Napper.
Yes, thank you very much. I noticed at the end of our agenda that you're looking for a host for the annual council barbecue in September, and as part of my farewell tour, I would love to host the county barbecue in Clifton, Wyoming, just to
that's
just the legend is leaving.
Thank you for that, Councillor Napper. Staff will be in touch. Okay.
Be nice, Mike.
Oh, Councillor Bradley, sorry.
No, I just wanted to know how long this tour is going to last.
It worked for Bruce Springsteen.
We'll miss you, Lonnie.
Thanks, Mike. All the best tomorrow, eh?
Okay, thank you. So we have a gentleman that has requested to speak, but he's not on the agenda. We would need, I would ask council how they would like to deal with this. Yeah, please, Mr. Stifo, if you would go over it, please.
Thank you, Warden Merritt. This morning I had a discussion with Mr. Randy Damon, correct? And Mr. Randy Damon would like to address council on Bill 109, which amended a number of statutes, most importantly the planning legislation. That bill became law in mid-April. He has concerns with respect to delegations that were granted under that legislation. So he wishes to speak to council. The first time we heard about that was this morning when Mr. Damon showed up to your chambers. Now, having provided that brief context, I can advise council that your rules of procedure require individuals to provide at least 6 days advance notice to be slotted as delegates on your agenda. The purpose of that rule is to ensure that any materials that the individual wishes to present is before you well in advance so that you can prepare reading those materials and, of course, do your own research so that you can have sort of an informed interaction with the delegation. So that's the rule. It requires, again, 6 days advance notice. We didn't obviously receive it. Now, if you wish to suspend that rule, you may do so on 2/3 majority vote from council. So if you were to provide the opportunity to speak, 2/3 vote from council would have to be granted. And again, in terms of advice, recommendation, I would urge you to seriously consider the action in terms of the precedent that may set. There ought to be compelling reasons to suspend your rules, and I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Stark, you have your hand up.
I do, and with respect to the clerk's comments, I totally agree. Furthermore, the time-sensitive nature of the request escapes me. The bill has already had royal assent. So what is the rush? I mean, the gentleman can put a request to make a submission at the next meeting, and it's not going to change anything. So I will not be supporting the request.
Councillor Miller.
If it's made.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you. I'll make a motion to deny the request at this time.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor Cook, seconds. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Any other business before we move on to item number 19? Okay, item number 19, notice of bylaws.
Thank you,
Mr. Tifo,
Warden.
please.
Thank you, Warden Marriott. It is moved by Councillor Miller, seconded by Councillor Rombouts, that bylaws 17 and 18 of 2022 as circulated be taken as read a first and second time.
All in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
It is moved by Councillor Rombaugh, seconded by Councillor Miller, that bylaws 17 and 18 of 2022 as circulated be taken as read a third and final time.
All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. That brings us to adjournment. We would adjourn until Wednesday, July the 6th, with in camera commencing at 9 a.m. Councillor Bean. Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Loosely. All in favor? That's carried. Please join us in O Canada with singing O Canada.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Have a good start to the rest of the summer.